covering it up lets you know that it's much worse than what is actually revealed.
On that matter, following you up on that, why would Iran go for a ceasefire when they have them on the ropes? Because what the U.S. and Israel and their proxies like to do is rest, rearm, and recalibrate. Even though Iran was taking damage, it was dealing out more damage, and it could have. We saw that the interceptors were almost depleted, and we see that the U.S. and Israel became panicked from the little information that we've gleaned from what happened during the strikes. Why do you think that Iran allowed Israel a breather?
It's a good question, and I think there are arguments for both, right? Whether it should have pressed its advantage. If it did have an advantage, it's possibly very likely. Certainly, in terms of attrition, purely in terms of the math, it does have an advantage because, for every missile that Iran shoots, Israel has to send 2 to 10 interceptors, and those interceptors are incredibly expensive. The missiles themselves may not be so expensive. So purely from that standpoint, from a financial, from a bean counting standpoint, Israel was already starting to be depleted and losing the war. Should Iran have pressed its advantage? I think there's an argument that could have been made there, but I think there are many factors involved. I think the fact that the United States was also threatening to get involved, the fact that both that Iran, the United States, and Israel both have nuclear weapons. I think these are important facts. Is it possible for a powerful country to fight two nuclear-armed nations at once? I think that sometimes you have to, discretion is the better part of valor. And I think that even inside the situation, remember the U.S. bombed Fordo and other nuclear plants, claimed to have destroyed them completely. But if you look at the Iranian retaliation, it was very, very symbolic and minimal. They did the absolute minimum. They telegraphed what they were going to do, and then they, sent something which was really a symbolic act. The fact that they sent a symbolic gesture signals that probably the damage to Fordo was trivial or only symbolic. Even the U.S. intelligence are saying that it's only put it back a few months, if even that. So I think that the damage of the U.S. attack was insignificant, and therefore Iran felt comfortable making a symbolic gesture back, simply a shot over the bow, not a complete all-out war. And having sent that message, it's looking to see if the ceasefire will hold, because let's get back to it. Ultimately, Iran does not want war, does not want war with the United States, does not want war with Israel. It simply wants to develop peacefully. It has not been an aggressive nation. It fights when it is attacked, but it is not a country that has gone abroad seeking domination and mayhem, as at least for several centuries, as has the Imperial West. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see if the ceasefire holds. I think there's a lot of concern that it could just be a ploy, and that's also very likely. But even so, I think that time is on Iran's side, not on Israel or the United States.
I want to play this short clip, and I want your take on this as soon as this plays.
We spoke with the research director at the Valdai Discussion Club's Foundation for Development and Support. He believes that the U.S. was kept in the loop regarding Israel's latest plans to attack Iran.
In this particular case, I guess that to launch a major war with absolutely unprecedented consequences, that would not be happening without the notice to the United States. Another thing is that Trump could not give a clear indication that he agreed. he might demonstrate that basically he understands the logic. And Israel did interpret this as a sign, go ahead. Anyway, at this point, whether Americans knew or not, we see that Trump actually, he's still talking about negotiations, but it's not about negotiations anymore. He now says that Iran has to accept everything Americans are proposing or face fatal and terminal consequences. So it's not about negotiations from my point of view. Maybe it is a Trumpian style because he sometimes believes that the tougher demands, the easier to get to conclusion, something which normally worked in his real estate business, but international relations is something else.
So, in words, he was saying that this could not have happened without the U.S. approval. And why is it that the West continues to report that Trump is willing to negotiate and wants negotiation when he was the one who tore up the JCPOA, and he was the one who kept flip-flopping? One week he said this is what they wanted. The next week he said another thing is what they wanted. Is this all a ploy to try to trap Iran and make it capitulate?
I think it is a ploy. I think the negotiations are not in good faith. I think they're a strategy. They're part of the toolbox of war, just as the IAEA itself was weaponized against Iran. So certainly, I don't expect much to come out of this. But for now, we have a little pause on the killing, which is, a small respite. Sometimes you have to take, what is, sometimes you need that respite. Certainly, as the speaker pointed out, it's not a real negotiation. It's essentially they're demanding surrender. They, on their term, their idea of negotiation is that you accept everything that we ask for, which is a non-starter. But going back to the larger picture, was the U.S. involved in it? Of course, we know the U.S. was intricately involved in this. This is like multiple administrations had been planning this out. It goes back to the 90s or even before that, but certainly the U.S., had prepared this thoroughly, and they were using Israel as their attack dog. When they say, oh, the attack dog, behaved by itself. Well, that's because you took it off the leash, and you were in the meantime feeding it steroids, right? So it's all, the policy paper, the leave it to BB, has been thoroughly, analyzed. Essentially, this is a U.S. plan. It's a U.S. plan to use Israel as a proxy to further its imperial goals in West Asia. And when the U.S. pretends that, it was reluctantly pulled in, this is propaganda. It's a fig leaf. It's anytime the U.S. uses the words enmeshment or pulled in regarding its vassals, you're being lied to. It's like this, it's that the ventriloquist will sometimes pretend that the puppet is telling them what to do, but you have to understand, underneath the puppet is the ventriloquist's hand. That's what's going
on. Someone in the chat says, could thorium be a good way to go? Let me highlight it. Could thorium be a good way for Iran with nuclear energy? Maybe it's too soon for China to share the technology. I'm not sure, but I heard it was more difficult to weaponize, safer, and greener. Before you answer that, KJ, I think it's not even about enrichment. I think it is more a play on subjugating Iran under any excuse.
Yeah, absolutely. It is about subjugating Iran. It's about regime change. The U.S. has never forgiven Iran for taking back its sovereignty in 1979. Remember, 1954, the US overthrew a democratically elected government, put in one of the worst dictators, of that period, literally created a police state. And right now, the son of that dictator is saying that he's going to go back and bring human rights to Iran. Is absolute and total absurdity. These are the people who destroyed human rights, that turned the country into a police state. So we should not be deceived by any of that propaganda. But yeah, it's not about it really is about regime change. They want to destroy Iran, or at least subjugate it to the point that it is simply a vassal as the other countries in the area. But yeah, the larger picture, yes, thorium is a possibility, and one of the reasons why it is it's a way of generating uh, nuclear power without many of the risks involved. The U.S. also had a thorium program, but it got rid of it because it wasn't leading to weapons. You couldn't weaponize thorium, so can't use that. It always has to be about war and weaponry. But yes, I think that China has done some extraordinary things with molten salt thorium reactors. I believe that these are the future, or at least a significant part of the future of sustainable energy generation, along with all the other things that China's doing: solar, wind, uh, etc., wave, etc. All of these things are, it's an entire different topic, but just tremendously positive things that are coming out of China in terms of a complete and total transition to sustainable energy. And at the same time that China is developing these technologies, it's sharing them almost as a public good with the rest of the world. And so there are tremendous possibilities there. I think the thorium is still a few years off, but China has shown proof of concept that you can have a functioning thorium reactor. And I don't think it will be long, perhaps 5-10 years, where they will start sharing this technology. But in the meantime, Iran also has the right to develop its nuclear power as it sees fit. And also the other issue is that I think it's pretty clear that Iran needs its own nuclear deterrent. The choice that Iran is facing is: are you going to become Libya, or are you going to become North Korea? And I think that they will make their own decision. But certainly, the indicators, or the logical choice would be to become like North Korea.
And I also believe that the push to subjugate Iran has a lot to do with the underbelly of Russia and China, specifically China. They believe that if they can suppress Iran, they can control the Belt and Road project of China. They can control the sea routes in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, along with the Malacca Strait. They can essentially have China's economy by the throat. And I believe that is one reason why Iran plays such a strategic part in their plans to subjugate China. What do you say on that, KJ? And what are your thoughts on them pushing so hard to defang Russia and also to go after Iran with such passion?
I think you're right. Ultimately, the goal is to prevent the rise of a counter-hegemonic multipolar world. This is the global South arising and trying to strip itself from the shackles of 500 years of Western colonial imperialism. There's a sea change happening. These are tectonic shifts that are happening. And the key facilitator, or the key center of gravity of this, is China. It's China. As China becomes more and more powerful, there's more and more countries will and are being pulled into its orbit. And then as that happens, as they build out relations, essentially you have a vast counter-hegemonic bloc that can resist, the complete and total domination of the unipolar empire. inside that, the U.S. also has its counter strategy, which is to use choke points. So certainly the Straits of Malacca are one choke point. That's why there's all this, weaponization of the South China Sea against China, which is why the U.S. is, constantly stirring up trouble, because they know that as soon as they choke off the Malacca Straits, that's $5.3 trillion worth of China's trade and 80% of its fuel oil. Same thing with the Strait of Hormuz and Iran. They want to control that, and again, they know that if they can choke out these places, then Iran will be significantly, sorry, Japan. No, I'm getting confused here. China will be significantly impaired. And remember, the goal is China. China is the main dish. And the question around Russia and Iran was, are they going to be soup or salad or dessert, right? Do you go to the main dish first and eat the salad afterwards? Do you eat the salad first and have the main dish? But everybody wants to go to China, and along the way, they have strategically sequenced it so that they go through, West Asia first and knock out Russia, and then you enter China from the soft underbelly, from the east, and also from the west. So this is a decades-long strategy that is being built out. Specifically, it was enunciated, starting around 2011, what we call the pivot to Asia. And it's also a hybrid war, because it involved not simply a preparation for kinetic war, but for economic war, for trade war, for tech war, as well as information war, and all the other dynamics. So all of this is to say that there is strategic sequencing going on, and there is also, as Brian Berletic says, there is a division of labor that is being apportioned out. Israel, attacks Iran, Ukraine attacks Russia, Japan and Korea and Taiwan are going to attack China and the Philippines as well, and then the U.S. will be the puppet master behind all of it. And then the puppet master will say, "Oh, look, the puppet is telling me what to do." The ventriloquist is saying, "Oh, my puppet is telling me what to do." No, there is the ventriloquist behind this, the puppet master. It has an agenda and is driving all of this. And then the question becomes, what can the global South do? How can it resist? And this is much bigger topic. But the first thing that it needs to do is it needs to find strong connections, resist being pulled apart, because the U.S. strategy is to individualize them, pick them apart, pull them apart, and then take them down one by one. The other piece is to continue development and also not be pulled into unnecessary kinetic engagement. There's a kind of bloodletting that's going on. The U.S. wants this constant bloodletting. I think it's the choice of Iran or other countries to decide whether it's useful for them to constantly get into that knife fight and constantly lose blood, or to step back and then see if there are other measures that they can do.
Brian and I, we talked about this on several occasions, Brian Berletic. And a lot of people have dismissed what we were saying about the need for America to take down Iran because it's the soft underbelly of China and Russia. And I don't think a lot of the pundits understand the play that America is doing. She, as we talked about the division of labor, the reason that America, in her mind, thinks that she has to take down China is because China is a non-Western, non-white nation, and it does not play inside the rules prescribed by the so-called Western world. So, KJ, what do you say about the pundits and the alternative media that dismisses the part where we say that Iran is a strategic aim of the United States as it tries to move on China?
I think they need to understand it, that there is this sequencing going on, very deliberate strategic sequencing, very deliberate division of labor, as Brian has pointed out many times, and that this is a much larger agenda going on. If you just focus down, on the trees, you're going to miss the large thing that's happening. This is we are actually in World War III right now, and this is one of many fronts where the battle is being waged. And so if you just kind of use your microscope to focus just on one area, as dramatic and as horrifying it may be, you're going to miss the bigger picture, which is that this is a multi-front war happening in multiple domains at the same time, not simply the kinetic domain, but also in the informational domain, in the political domain, in the diplomatic, in the economic, in the trade, in the technological domain, etc. It's happening multiple ways on multiple fronts, and we have to understand that rather than just be captured by the media saying "watch the birdie." It's a mistake.
And I know the time is limited, so I'll limit it to one or two more questions, KJ. But I think that the pundits don't get that the empire is playing for time. Everything, all of the economic barometers are deteriorating. This all is connected to the economics because the empire understands that China challenges it economically. So could you elaborate a little bit on how why the empire is pushing so hard against Russia, China, Iran, and the global South, and how it's connected to the economic side?
Yeah, I mean, this is monopoly capitalism. Capitalism, when you have open markets, it results in monopolies. Monopolies do many things, but among them, it enshittifies, and then it moves towards financialization. It seeks to gouge rents instead of actually creating use value. And so this is why, for example, these days you can go onto your app and you order a burrito from DoorDash and you can pay for it in 4 convenient installments, right? This is the financialization of everything. Instead of building products that have use value, that are produced and manufactured for human use, you enshittify those products, and then eventually you just gouge, and then you start financializing everything. Simply you say, I'm going to make a claim on your money through rents or through rentier extraction. And then as you do this, you actually hollow out the power of your own society. So this is all these complaints about saying, oh, China stole our jobs, and they, and now they're the industrial powerhouse. Well, this was a very deliberate thing that U.S. capitalists did. They wanted hyper profits, so they went abroad, seeking those massive hyper profits, exploiting cheaper labor, and at the same time they financialized and they said, we're simply going to draw extractive claims on other people's money. This is why you go to Apple will sell you, first they'll make your computer break down after a few years, and then they'll sell you another one, but you can finance it because of course at this point you've been so immiserated and impoverished you can't afford it. So these are the inherent contradictions of capital, is that financializes. As it financializes, it has to continue expanding aggressively, but still it cannot keep itself going. And what happened is that the corpulent body of capitalism collapsed in 2008. That was the global financial crash. It completely collapsed, and at that point, the game should have been over. They should have taken it to the morgue. But what they did was they reanimated the zombie. The zombie was reanimated, and it keeps going on. The monster is continuing to move on. It's like Frankenstein, and it's in school shooter mode. It's ready to destroy the world. But this is what happens with capitalism: is that the reset button for capitalism, for global capital, is war. It's like, if you think of capitalism as your corpulent uncle who, just can't control themselves, and then they have multiple strokes, and then they finally have this massive fibrillation heart attack. The wall defibrillator is global war. So that is part of the dynamic. That's why we're seeing this movement towards World War One, World War Three, which we are already in, and also we are. So this is the logic of capital, to use war to reboot its economy, and it's also the logic of empire, to see if it can keep its vassals under its boot, uh, uh, as it even as it starts to completely unwind itself. So there's a real desperation, and there's a real panic in the global center, in the imperial core, which is why it's so frantic, which is why it's in this, you know, uh, school shooter mode. But ultimately, it knows that it needs to take out China, and it needs to take out the pillars of the multipolar world, and to put them back down under this global extractive regime. And then if it can't do that, then they know that the game is up, and so that's why they're willing to literally risk everything, and that's why it's so dangerous.
So, KJ, last question to you. America will not give up her position willingly. And we see that she's willing to ignore all norms, all international law, or whatever. And she says that China is the most pressing and imminent threat to American and Western hegemony. Where does this lead us, especially if a military confrontation takes place between the two?
It leads to a very, very bad place, because the first thing we know is that U.S. is not capable of beating China in a conventional war. Certainly, it is not capable of beating China on its own doorstep, which is where it's preparing or planning its fight. That is along the first island chain, Taiwan Island, the South China Sea, along the Korean Peninsula, all along that kind of arc of encirclement that the U.S. has prepared. That is 5,000 miles away from Hawaii. So if you think purely in terms of replenishment and logistics, this is the U.S.'s war to lose. In fact, if the U.S. were to go to war against China, it would actually be attacking its own supply chain, because most of the manufactured goods that the US uses, including what the DoD uses, are manufactured in China, not the least of which are rare earth elements, which are, contrary to most people's belief, they are very rare, because if you ask people to name three, they won't be able to name them. But so uh, so so US is, there's a deep, deep contradiction. It's the contradiction of empire and capitalism on its last legs. It's also the contradiction of attacking its own supply chain, and it's also the contradiction that it really is out of capacity. It cannot fight and defeat China in a war, or a conventional war. So then what that lets us know is that there is the nuclear option, which is being prepared. And if you look at all the policy papers, and if you look at all the strategic design, and if you look at all the kind of staging that's happening on, it is all dual use in preparation for nuclear attacks. The US considers tactical nukes to be usable. The Tomahawks that they're putting on the first island chain, the Typhoon missiles, all of that, these are nuclear capable or dual nuclear conventional capable weapons platforms. So I think that the idea is to nuke China, as they've wanted to do since 1949 and multiple times in 1958, 1962, etc. So I think nuclear war is being prepared. And the arrogance of the United States is that it thinks that if it has a nuclear strike, that the Chinese will back down. That's not likely. Essentially, we will simply continue to go up the nuclear escalation.